John Charles Rennie was born on February 20th, 1844 in Antrim, Ireland. He was an only child and his father Henry died when he was 10 years old. Charles and his mother went and lived with his Aunt Agnes and Uncle Robert Reid, who would later become a premier in Australia. When Charles was 26 years old, he met 17-year-old Roseanne Lilly. They were married shortly after on February 24th, 1871 in Old Mucklin Church, County Down, Ireland. Rose was 18 and Charles 27. After their marriage, they went to live in Coatbridge, Scotland. This was a risky move as many people were fleeing from Scotland because of religious persecution. Charles tells of people fleeing from everything in the middle of the night with nothing but their night clothes. Charles worked in a coal mine from a very early age and was completely self-educated. At a time when conditions were not good, many of their friends were going to Canada and other places to find better opportunities. Although they had 6 children, Charles and Rose decided to go too. Charles's uncle Robert was going to help them if they came to Australia, so Canada was supposed to be merely just a stop on the way. The ship they set sail on was called the Caspian, which incidentally sunk on its next voyage. During their voyage, a terrible storm came. All women and children were told to go below. This terrible experience made Rose vow that if she ever got safely to land, she would never leave it again. After they arrived in Canada, nothing would convince her to go on to Australia. They first settled in Low Point, Cape Breton. It was a very severe winter, so Charles decided they would not stay there, and in the spring of 1885 they went to Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. Charles received mine manager papers and worked there for 15 years. Charles and Rose had 6 more children before moving back to Cape Breton. They settled in Dominion, and that's where they stayed. Charles died in the family home on October 14, 1929 at 85 years old from unknown causes. Rose continued to live there until she passed away on December 1, 1948 at 95 years old. Annie Rennie, the 6th-born child from Charles and Rose, was born on September 3, 1882 in Bothwell, Scotland. Annie had accompanied her parents on the voyage and was the last of their children to be born in Scotland. Annie married David Archie McCouche on August 20, 1901 in Old Bridgeport, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. They had their first child, Rosanna, on June 10, 1902. Rosanna would have lived a short life as she died in the family home on Christmas Eve, 1918, at just 16 years old. She died as a result from the 1918 influenza pandemic. It affected 500 million people across the world and killed close to 100 million, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. They had 9 more children: Margaret, Agnes, David, Lydia, Elizabeth, John Charles, Isabel, Anne, and Jean, but because of unforeseen circumstances would acquire an 11th child. John Charles McCouche, the 7th-born child, was my great-grandfather. When Charles was 17, his parents adopted his older sister's illegitimate child, Kenneth. Kenny would be raised as a younger brother, not a nephew. Kenny was born as Charles Delmar. His mother was Agnes, and once she became pregnant, she moved to New Hampshire and started a new life. After marrying and having another child, she realized she could not care for Kenny and asked her mother to take him. Annie and Charles agreed, and when Kenny was 2, he officially became Kenneth Delmar McCouche. When John Charles was 23, he met the love of his life. Lillian Bowie was born on November 24, 1913 in Tracadie, New Brunswick. They were married on February 14, 1939 in the St. John's Catholic Church in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. Together they had 6 children, 3 boys, John Charles, James Wayne, and David Carson, and then 3 girls, Donna Patricia, Margaret Diane, and Norma Joan. They would raise their children in Bridgeville, Nova Scotia. My grandfather is David Carson McCouche. He was born on August 9, 1943 in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. He was the 3rd-born son. When my grandpa was 17, he got rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever is caused by untreated strep throat. This fever causes the joints in your body to swell up, making it hard to move at all. In more severe cases, it affects the heart and its ability to pump blood. About 300,000 people were killed from 1950 to 1965 from rheumatic fever. My grandpa was lucky enough to just be put on bed rest. He was laid up for 4 weeks on his couch, unable to move. When David was 19, he packed up and moved to Alberta to start a new life and get better opportunities. Him and some of his friends headed to Calgary and lived there for a while, working in a trailer factory. Then they headed to Manor, Saskatchewan in the spring of 1963 and began working on the rigs. During his first road ban, he headed back home to Nova Scotia. On his way back, he stopped in Toronto and bought his first car and drove it the rest of the way here. Soon after coming back, he quit the rigs and began living on a farm just south of Frobisher, working as a farmhand. This is where he first met Doreen DL and where he would spend the rest of his life. Doreen was born on January 30th, 1947 to Stuart and Audrey DL. She was the youngest of 3 girls. She grew up on the family farm and was the 3rd generation of DLs to live there. Her father died on the family farm on June 26, 1962. Doreen and Dave started dating in the summer of 1964, and they both continued to work on the farm. They got married on January 5, 1965 in Independence, Missouri. They had their first child, Denise Lynn McCouche, on July 30, 1965. For the next 3 years, Dave, Doreen, Denise, and Doreen's mother Audrey lived on the farm together until the birth of my father. On August 7, 1968, my dad, David Dean McCouche, was born in Estevan. 2 years later, on June 30, 1970, the family would be complete with the birth of Jeffrey Scott McCouche. The 5 of them would live on the farm with Doreen's mother until she passed away on March 8, 1984. My dad and both of his siblings went all through school the same I did. We all started in Frobisher, then transferred to Beanfate, and then into Estevan for high school. My Auntie Denise, my dad, my Uncle Scott, both my brothers, and myself have all graduated from the Estevan Comprehensive School. When my dad was 17, he met Kyla Jones at the Kenosee water slides. She lied to him about her age and said she was 16 when she had actually just turned 14. They went their separate ways, and 3 years later, they found each other again. On May 12, 1989, my parents started dating. After my mom graduated from high school in Oxbow, she moved into my grandparents' basement with my dad. They lived there for 9 months before finding their own place to live. My parents got engaged on my mother's birthday, July 29, 1991. My dad was not the most formal man, and to this day he has never actually asked my mother to marry him. Instead, she just got to pick out the ring. On January 16, 1993, my Auntie Denise was killed in a snowmobiling accident. I have never met her, but from everything I've heard, she was a wonderful woman. She is buried in the Frobisher Cemetery just north of town. My parents married later that year on June 26, 1993 in Frobisher. My dad got married in jeans and cowboy boots, and my mother wore her mother's dress. On June 13, 1994, they had their first child, my oldest brother, Dustin David McCouche. 2 years later, on September 18, 1996, they had my other brother, Cole Dean McCouche. I was the last child, born on November 29, 1999. On June 16, 2017, I graduated from the Estevan Comprehensive School and will be attending the University of Regina in the fall. My whole family still lives in Frobisher in the same house that I grew up in. This is the story of how I got my place in Canadian history.